Cool. Yeah. Welcome, everybody. My name is Michael Lamb. I'm one of the community ambassadors at Teradu. And today we've got actually a great event where we have two speakers this time, not just one, Brian and Melissa. Brian is a co-founder of AdAstra Talent Advisors, where he functions as the CTO and COO. And then Melissa is a senior technical headhunter with AdAstra Talent Advisors, where she leads both the technical and executive searches for hard tech startups in climate, space, and defense. And so they've got a presentation and a few great insights for you guys. If you guys want to ask questions during the thing, please raise your hand and happy to come off mute or ask them directly. But we are probably going to do like a Q&A section at the end. So if you guys can please welcome Melissa and Brian.
Everybody, thank you so much for having us. We're excited to share a little bit about ourselves and a lot of the insights that we've uncovered from working with space startups over the last like 5.5 years or so, or clean tech startups and space startups. So I'll get to that in just a second. So um, first, just want to show kind of the agenda of how we're structuring our time together. So first, we'll share a little bit more about AdAstra and our company and kind of why it's relevant to this conversation, share a little bit more about who Melissa and I are specifically, and then transition to talking about how to actually transition into climate and clean tech and the skills valued specifically by the startups that we're typically working with, and then get into some lessons learned from industry experience. But we want to make sure we leave plenty of time for Q&A, and also very happy to jump in with questions, as Michael mentioned, throughout the conversation. So if you want to jump in verbally, just kind of raise your hand. I think Michael will jump on it. Or if you want to put something in the chat, if we can engage with it as the time goes, we'll do our best. Otherwise, get to it at the end. So, yeah, with that, I'll jump into about AdAstra. So, what we do at AdAstra is we build thriving teams within elite hard tech startup organizations, and we focus specifically with startups in climate, space, and defense. So, it might seem a little strange, like climate and clean tech, like why is your company named Ad Astra and why are you also working in like space and defense? So I wanted to share just a little bit more about that. And I think also introductions about our background will help to clarify it as well. But the key thing is that we're working with industries and candidate pools that are extremely mission motivated. I imagine most of you are on this call and interested in climate and clean tech because you care about its mission and you care about saving this planet. And that's exactly what we're interested in and what all of our candidates are interested in too. And it turns out a lot of those same candidates that have accomplished a lot in hard tech and in early stage startups, often they're maybe coming from other hard tech industries that have been successful over the last decade or two. And I think space is a good example of that. So, um, and more recently, defense has been a rising industry of interest for people. The geopolitical tensions have risen a lot, and so there's a lot more interest in defense than there was previously. So we're partnering specifically with early stage startups, specifically in climate, space, and defense, and we're working with these organizations to fill their most highly technical and executive leadership positions. So that's where we get pulled in, is when a company really needs to grow their team, fill a difficult role. That's where we come in and execute a search to fill those positions. We also are often acting as advisors to our clients and helping them set up their internal processes and think about strategy and hiring plan. And so we're a little bit more than just this like third party recruiting firm that just like throws candidates at companies, and much more get into the trenches with them. We're often at the very earliest stages, maybe even placing co-founders or founding team members and advising them along the way in order to get um, the most out of their hiring process, and then also, set up people operations structures and procedures to be able to retain the best talent and build the best culture. So I'll pause there. Melissa, we'll get to your introduction here next, but is there anything I missed there about kind of what we do at AdAstra? Anything that you wanna add there, or should we jump into introductions next?
Yeah, I think just to kind of add to that, yeah, how we're different is that we really want to build relationships with candidates and with clients that are kind of ongoing, right? And sometimes candidates can become future clients and vice versa, right? So it's definitely a kind of a different approach compared to other potential large staffing agencies that if anyone's ever worked with kind of a different dynamic.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Melissa. And we'll get into my background here in just a minute, but I came from the space industry. I worked at SpaceX many years ago as an engineer, and I think, how we got into climate from being in space specifically initially was talking to all of these space engineers who either wanted to go to other planets and, visit Mars or go explore the solar system, or they want to save this planet. And so I think there turned out to be a surprisingly significant overlap in interest from these industries, and also even a lot of the tech and works pretty well. And a lot of those hard skills translated pretty well. So yeah, let's get into introductions now. My background, I'm a former SpaceX engineer. But before that, I got my bachelor's and master's in aerospace engineering at the University of Michigan, and I worked at SpaceX spanning 7 years from 2012 to 2018, where I was primarily a propulsion engineer. After that, I did a short stint at an early stage startup in the Bay Area where I was leading up drone and field operations for a software-based company. And it was about 5.5 years ago, 6 years ago now, that my wife and I had this idea to merge our backgrounds to form AdAstra. So her background's all in talent acquisition. She's been hiring internally and externally at a variety of organizations, big and small, early and late stage, and doing advising, consulting, and talent acquisition. So we merged those backgrounds to be able to partner with um, these companies that we've discussed. And um, Melissa was one of our very first hires, and I'll let her give herself an introduction here now.
Awesome. Yeah, and good morning and afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. So, yes, I'm Melissa, and I've been here now almost 4 years, but have also spent the last decade in talent acquisition from a few different vantage points. I started my career actually in high volume IT recruiting with a very large global staffing agency. From there, I went and joined a real estate tech startup as the first talent acquisition specialist. That was actually a really great experience early on in my career because I got to see, the inner workings of a startup team, and really embrace, the concept of wearing multiple hats. One day scheduling interviews and speaking with candidates, my core function, right? And then the next day I'd be on a project team testing Zendesk and taking logistics calls for customer service, or your IT specialist helping out with office moves, or helping marketing team host events with NFL games. So a little bit of everything, which was super fun. But then the next years, I actually spent in financial services, mostly in recruitment marketing, operations, and also corporate learning and development. Then I made my way to AdAstra. And since then, I've specialized in mechanical and systems engineering, but I do float across engineering domains and levels now. I also lead searches for leaders in operations, business development, finance, HR, talent, you name it. So again, a little bit of everything. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about me. And I'm looking forward to sharing some insights into the talent market today.
Perfect. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, I couldn't do a quick pause here if anyone has any questions about kind of our backgrounds or why we might be worth listening to on this topic. Like, please jump in with any questions. Otherwise, we can move on here. But I think it'd be really great. I know people are dropping a lot in the chat, and I love seeing what's in the chat. And also, I'd love to just kind of rapid fire and hear from people. Are you in everyone here, if you could answer, like, are you already in climate or clean tech? And if not, what industry are you currently in? I'd love to get kind of a sampling of you all about kind of where people are coming from on the industry side. Great. Climate. USAID. I'm not sure if I know what that is. B2B SaaS, fintech. Okay, education. Great. B2B SaaS. Great. Climate, fintech, ad tech. Electrical engineer. Great. Yeah, it looks like we got a pretty wide variety here, coming from a lot of different places. So this is really helpful. Thank you, everybody. Um, Want to start to transition in here into speaking about some of the challenges and opportunities about transitioning into climate or clean tech. I know some of you are already here in this industry, and then some of it seems like the majority though are not. And so love to share just some of the challenges and opportunities you might face in making that transition. We've seen this a lot. So you know, climate and clean tech has been growing really significantly over the last like 5 to 10 years, and there's it's largely like a new industry. So you basically have to everyone coming in was new at at some point, right? And so what are the challenges in breaking into that, and what are the opportunities? So let's start with some of these challenges. So for me, I think one of the bigger things I see is that most of these industries are actually within climate and clean tech have companies that um, really lack a culture of innovation. So what that means is that like if we look at the energy industry or the utilities industry, these are archaic industries that have been focused on largely putting up a lot of red tape, a lot of bureaucracy, and um, and so it means that to for companies to innovate in these spaces, it's a lot harder. They're up against a lot of red tape and a lot of challenges, and so it makes it difficult for them to move quickly and innovate. And so it's challenging for people to have the skills to come in to be both in a startup or an earlier stage like innovative company and also be operating in a larger market that is full of challenges to slow you down. Um, Similar to that, there's also a lot of, oh yeah, Melissa, please.
Yeah, I just to add to that too is that especially kind of early on, the teams can be spending a significant time in R&D or in the lab, right, which can be a different type of environment or skill set even compared to the product development side. And so kind of thinking through, how to transition concepts into design and production and when to start thinking and hiring for that is kind of another element to consider.
Yeah, that's really good. And Um, another challenge too is there's a lot these industries depend heavily on kind of what's going on in government and policy. And so and venture capital. And so the in based on changing inflation rates and how venture capital is flowing and what money is flowing from the government and who's in the Oval Office, there's a little more instability in that sense, and we've seen some of this be shaky in the last few years. Um, and so have to be a little ready for the instabilities that come with early stage startups, and especially ones that also are pretty dependent on policymakers.
Yeah, and
Yeah, go.
thing to that is that, especially in that industry, it requires a substantial capital investments upfront for developing and scaling the tech, and realizing success can take longer compared to other sectors, right? And so, getting a product to market and navigating the different regulatory bodies is another element, right? And especially since it's competitive, you have the established players and then also emerging and new startups that are all vying for the same limited government incentives or resources and market share, right?
Yeah, really, really good. And then we'll get into this piece in a little bit more sooner, but um like I mentioned, almost everyone who's entering climate and clean tech or in this industry was new to it at some point because it's basically brand new. So it can be very challenging to enter the industry without that one-to-one experience of like, I've done this exactly before. And so I think that, I was at Climate Week in SF last year and attending some panels and conversations, and this topic kept coming up of like, well, how do I break in when they want experience, but that experience doesn't exist? It's it's kind of funny, like, oh, you want, 10 years working on Fusion, for example. It's like, well, Fusion has not really been around that much for the last 10 years. So there's this kind of unrealistic expectation of how much chat of one-to-one experience is needed in order to break into the industry. And so it's a little bit of an uphill battle, but we've seen people be very successful in this, and we can discuss here soon like some of the key ways to overcome that.
We've got a question from Jeremy in the chat here. He
Perfect.
was asking, how will the new DOE freeze impact the industry?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think that a lot of the industry, despite the industry wanting to leverage government funding, a lot of the industry is also very aware of the instabilities in government and is largely focusing on developing solutions that are not too dependent on that. And instead, thinking of government and partnerships with government as more supplemental, and instead leveraging venture capital to grow and scale quickly in order to deliver a need or deliver a product that meets a more consumer market or um, business market that is less dependent on government funding. Um, so I'm hopeful that this will not have a massive, massive impact, but I don't think in general people are um, overly optimistic or overly excited about some of the changes being happening in Washington. And there's a lot of pausing and waiting right now, right? There's a lot, whenever there's a new, in the election year, it's pretty unstable because what's going to happen. And then we get some stability once we know who wins the election. But then even coming in, the number of executive orders being signed and all the turbulence that there is right now, I think a lot of companies are just kind of taking a beat before to see where things actually settle out. So I think we'll know a lot more in the coming weeks or months. Great. Jumping into some opportunities though, wherever there are these challenges, there's also a lot of opportunity for coming up with unique ways to innovate or find creative solutions. And so for me, well, a lot of what's exciting in the opportunity space here is because we're kind of creating a new industry and finding and being hit with new challenges, it's also creating a lot of blank space to innovate. I was on a podcast yesterday with a couple of colleagues in the space industry, and one of them was telling a story about how a company was building a product that was, I think, dependent on a certain kind of funding, and then that funding dried up, and they were like really on the verge of having to close down, and really had way less cash than they thought they were going to have. And these constraints actually force them to think really creatively and come up with a solution that they would never have come up with otherwise if they didn't have those constraints. And so I would encourage people when kind of hitting any of these challenges, or to think about how can I come up with a creative solution despite these challenges, because it's a lot of times it's within those spaces that the most creative opportunities arise. I'm also very excited by seeing these industries grow and inherently pulling people in from different industries. So, in the chat, when everyone was sharing which industries they're coming from, we got a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different industries that people are looking to transition from and into this space. And so I think that brings immense diversity of perspective, a lot of different ways of thinking. And these different ways of thinking in will only benefit the industry, because each, every different industry has different ways that they've like found success and found ways to operate efficiently. And I'm really excited to see kind of what comes from having so many different perspectives entering climate and clean tech.
Yeah, to add to that, Brian, I definitely agree with that. And I've also kind of seen from the industry a willingness to kind of explore different backgrounds, because the one-to-one experience, right, is limited. So there has been more flexibility in the hiring process on what the ideal background could be, while of course still maintaining a high talent bar. But to your point too about the innovation piece, the advancements in like material science and AI and computation, the fact that the industry is relatively new, it feels like they're very much embracing and building a lot of momentum with those advancements, which is cool to see.
For sure. Melissa, anything else you want to add to opportunities, or shall we jump on to the next topic?
I think the only thing to add is that just from the candidate side, the mission, we talked about this a little bit, but it provides a really strong sense of purpose for employees. And, I frequently speak with candidates who are always looking for their work to be a reflection of their interests or values or the legacy of work they want to leave, right? And so this industry can definitely create rewarding careers with a very lasting impact.
Yeah. Very true. And I think that, and speaking to the question from the chat as well, there is a lot of uncertainty. There are a lot of roadblocks and ups and downs here, but there's also, and even though there's opposition, right? There's a lot of people who don't share the same passions and interests as the 50 people on this call, but there's a majority or general support in saving the planet, right? And in moving technologies to a cleaner, more sustainable future. And so I think it's very exciting to see this momentum and enthusiasm exist despite some public and resistance or battles. And I think in general, there's still strong interest from venture capital and from the general public. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity and excitement for what's to come. All right. So want to speak to what startups are specifically looking for if you're wanting to transition into climate or clean tech. And I think that, want to also just remind people the context here, and that our backgrounds and what we're typically working with are early stage startups. So this might be right at founding, typically through Series A, sometimes Series B. So I'm not saying none of these things are true beyond that, but that's kind of the sweet spot of like what we're speaking to is these earlier stage companies, teams that are under 1 or 200 people, funding that's, maybe tens of millions of dollars, single to tens of $1 million type range. And we've worked with and adjacent to some software companies, but we've also been more focused on hardware startups as well. And so I just want to clarify that as where our expertise is and what we're mostly speaking to. Again, not that it can't apply to software at all, but we have less expertise there. So I just wanted to kind of start with that. And I think the first thing that startups are looking for is startup experience, right? Big surprise. And so I think that um, we love to see that people have already been in a startup environment and succeeded in it. And all of our clients feel the same way. So I think if you have that experience already and you're looking to stay in the startup world, that's really incredible and puts you like a notch above. Now, Melissa, what would you say are some of these essential startup traits that even if you don't already have the startup experience, how can you kind of break into the startup world?
Yeah, the first thing coming to mind is definitely breadth of project experience is being kind of the big one,
Yeah.
along with the willingness to learn quickly new tech tools or methods, right? So, yeah, they definitely have more of a preference for have you integrated across multiple systems or have you focused only on one kind of specific system, right? For the
Yep.
leaders, kind of the similar but different is a willingness to get hands on with the product initially and people who are motivated by the product and technical ownership in addition to leadership.
Yeah, that's really good. I also see a strong desire to have folks who've proven their ability to move quickly, be very agile, make changes and directions very quickly. Um, and then there's just this like hunger, right? This like it factor of like, I'm gonna work really hard, but I'm also like just so excited to be here and like really passionate about like the work I'm doing and really bought into what the company's vision is. It's going to be a really hard road at a startup if you're not really bought into what they're doing. And if you're not bought into what they're doing and the leadership and the direction that's going, it's probably not going to work too well. And so, if you haven't already been in a startup, how can you kind of practice some of these skills that we're touching base on in your current role? Can you find ways to get more breadth of experience? Can you find smaller teams that are doing like quicker sprints on projects that you can deliver quickly? What can you do? Maybe in your free time, can you build something or start a small business? Like what can you do to show some of these key traits for the startup world that will be really, really beneficial and um, yeah. Um, Great. What else here? So, real world experience. This is a really good one. I think, we talk to a lot of folks who are looking to break into a new industry or a new role or something like that, and they often want to like go get a degree to do that. And that can be useful sometimes, but most of the time, I actually don't think that that leads to the results that people are looking for. I think we really want to see folks who are like doing real product development type work, and a lot of times the classroom doesn't provide that, or or even like labs that are doing big research projects. Sometimes it's very, very science focused and not nearly enough on the product development side. So definitely encourage people to focus on getting as much real world experience as you can.
Yeah, and to add to that, kind of the thing that comes to mind is the ability to innovate within resource or personnel constrained environments.
Mm,
um, Being able to tackle, some of those complex technical or logistical challenges often without precedent, right? And so there's elements of being able to learn on the fly. or even ask yourself, what's the most challenging technical decision you've made in the past year? What made it difficult? What were the trade-offs? And being able to talk through the logic of your trades is really powerful.
Really good. Really good. And then we've also, post-COVID, I've seen a lot of employers move heavily to on-site work. And again, this is maybe a little bit more of the bias towards us working with hard tech companies where hardware is like much more dependent on being in person. But I think we're even seeing this in software companies too, right? Even beyond the big like return to work news headlines for all the big organizations. Like there's something about being a small team and having in-person face-to-face work that is highly valued. And so um I would just be prepared and ready for that to continue to be a trend for a bit. And if not, it's not for gonna, there are software companies that are startups that are fully remote and that can work. I don't mean to hate on that, but I also think that there's just something to be said for that a lot of especially hard tech startups or especially early stage teams are going to really value that. And so be prepared for that and being able to um, be energized by that environment is valuable.
I've got a quick
Yeah,
question. I've been
please.
seeing a lot lately, like with job postings at like an individual's level, but because it's a climate or energy company, they require 3+ years of energy experience or climate experience. Like, what would your advice for somebody who has no experience but would be at that level uh, do to get around this?
Yeah, great question. I would, oh no, my computer's glitching. Can you still hear me? Yeah, okay, great. I'm back. So apply anyway. Like apply anyway and find a way to highlight why you don't need to have that experience to be successful in the role. Now, that in of itself is very high level advice, but some ideas like potentially a cover letter could be read to speak to that, or probably a more successful approach would be to like find out who the hiring team is, like at this organization, and reach out to them on LinkedIn and express sincere interest in the role and express why you're qualified and why you'd add value to them. Um, I agree that a lot of times these years of experience and something specific requirements are not real or necessary. And so it's less about have you actually done that thing or more about have you done something similar enough that can give the hiring team confidence that you'll be successful in the role. And so before you just assume that they'll get that by your resume, you need to find a way to communicate that clearly and tie in like why do you think they have this requirement? What are they actually looking for? And how does your expertise actually still give them what they're looking for? And speak to that directly. Great. Great. I think we're kind of, I want to make sure we leave enough time for questions. So I'll jump to, maybe just tell a couple quick stories here on some lessons learned that we've seen, and then just yeah, open it up more broadly for questions. For those of you that are already in climate or clean tech, I think there's one thing that I would love for people to keep an eye out for, and that is speaking to Michael's comment, like we need to be able to take chances on people, even if they don't have the right expertise yet. So instead of focusing, do they have the perfect technical fit for the exact thing I need today? I think it's much more valuable to be focusing on having the right culture fit, the right um, energy, and like, are they a high producer who's gonna succeed, kind of regardless of what role you put them in. We had a client that in clean tech over on the East Coast, and I was looking for a very specific person for them, and did find that person, but also along the way found someone that was much more junior, was coming from a more academic background, and so didn't really fit the exact role we needed, but had relevant enough skills and technical background, and just came with like raving reviews from their former like mentor that I connected with previously, and was able to get this person in front of the hiring team, and they loved him, and they figured out how to make a role for him. And less than like 2 years later, he's promoted and like twice into like bigger management roles and taking on like a very large scope at that company. And so I think like that's a really good example of, even though he didn't have the perfect industry experience, didn't fit the role perfectly, and was a little more academic, they recognized where the expertise was relevant and that this person was going to crush it, and gave them the shot. And it was like one of their best hires ever. Whenever we talk to them, they're like, thank God we have Eric, right? And so keep that in mind as you're hiring, or if you're not in clean tech now, but will be hiring once you're in there, keep this in mind. We need to find the right people with the right energy, and that tends to be more valuable than having the right skill set. Melissa, do you have one you want to um, share before we
Yeah,
open the Q&A?
yeah, and
Yes, thanks.
also just to
Yeah,
add to
just one.
that too. Oh, go ahead.
I think it was Aaron's mic. Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Yeah, just to kind of add to that too, yeah, kind of maintaining flexibility and ability to adjust role scope for the right candidate, right? And can you pull scope from another need that's coming up next month, right? Or fill in a gap with a subsequent hire. And so kind of give yourself more options than less options if you can. But also hiring very specific niche skill sets, right? It can take time. Some positions have very limited talent pools, and your top candidates may not be available when you need them. And so it can also take multiple attempts or conversations to convert a passive candidate into an active one. And so, yeah, it's all about timing. Brian, I say that all the time, right? And so if you have a very specific need, give yourself a little bit more time to make sure that we can make all the logistics line up.
Yeah. And the same can be true on the candidate side. To find the right fit, you got to give yourself some time. It takes a lot of direct hard work and effort and time often to land in the right spot. So stick with it and do the work, and it'll come to be, but it can be hard and take some time. All right, with that, we would love to get more questions. Would love to hear what people are most interested in learning about more on the talent side of things for for climate and clean tech. And I'll let Michael moderate for us here, if that works.
Yeah, we actually we'll go with the hand raised first. Sajida?
Hi. Thanks,
Yeah.
Michael, Melissa, and Brian. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I am an experienced product professional coming in from the software world. So I'm curious, what do you see when it comes to product roles? Are they few and far between in the spaces that you operate in? And what should, folks like me who come from a product background have in mind? I do have a technical background, but it's been years since I coded, and would love any practical insights that you can share there.
Yeah, great question. And so your background is software, right? So you probably worked with software companies versus hardware companies. Okay, great. So yeah, as previous disclaimers still apply, less expertise here in the software realm, but know enough here to like, so like on the hard tech side, there's not a lot of like product managers, program managers at early stage startups. Um, we can, we need to like kind of say what we want to we can't think what we want to think about like Elon and SpaceX and stuff, but like at the end of the day, SpaceX has been like the most successful hardware like startup in the last like decade or two. And a big part of that is like kind of taking out systems engineering, taking out a lot of program management, and at least for hardware, and entrusting that more to the individual engineers who own a system to be able to connect it with the other systems is like a key piece of how hardware startups have started to like build their companies around. And so it is something that I see start to get brought in more and more kind of mid or later stages with hardware companies, and I'm not exactly sure on the software side. I would imagine it's more applicable on the software side, based on what I do know, which isn't a ton, but like I did some product management type role in my when I was in the Bay Area, an early stage startup there. And I see kind of the value in product management a lot more in software. And so I wish I had a little more practical skill set, practical ideas for you, but I would imagine if there's any way to get more of that coding skill back, if there's any way you can, like speaking to Melissa's point of getting more breadth, um, and making yourself more valuable across more domains is probably going to be a really valuable skill for you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and add to that as well, a lot of our clients, regardless of what domain you kind of fall in, they're always looking for the systems thinking mindset. So an understanding of how the hardware integrates with software or with business systems. And so being able to highlight, the challenges deploying tech in real world conditions and highlighting that, as well as getting some of the breadth of the coding experience, like Brian mentioned, would be good to highlight in a cover letter, a resume, LinkedIn profile, and so forth when you're applying to positions out there.
Great,
And
thank
it
you.
also just frankly might be difficult for you if I'm being honest. Like that is a tough role to like apply for based on a resume because it's going to be like you
Mm.
kind of need to like prove yourself in an actual role for like there's not a code there's not a coding test for that I'm aware of, right? Like it's a
Yeah,
lot
yeah,
more like soft skills and it's easy to like pad a resume with like words that look like you're good at something. And so it might be most productive to um, find other ways to demonstrate your skills beyond like trusting that a resume will get through to someone in an
yeah.
application. It might be networking events or working some sort of side project or seeing how you can consult or advise folks and like where can you give them like let them see into
Mm-hmm.
your value directly, and let it expand from there.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
We did have a question from Jeremy a while back in the chat. His first one is, what are some of the staffing agencies with whom AdAstra competes, and what are
Mm.
some of the more traditional staffing agencies?
Yeah, great question. So I think we didn't touch on this too much, but part of what is maybe a little more unique about us is that there's kind of a couple of more standard models for how third-party recruiting is done. There's the high volume staffing agency model that, is tends to be quite a bit lower cost, but the quality is a bit lower, and they're focused a little bit more on just kind of sourcing a lot of people, sending them in, and then letting the hiring team like figure it out and close them. And then there's also executive headhunting firms. These are some of the bigger organizations. They charge a lot more. They're kind of more like name brand, if you will, if you're in those industries. But they charge a lot of money, and they tend to often work with like later stage organizations, but they give like really high quality service. That hold each step of the process is very like methodical, intentional, and they make sure nothing drops. They're like very organized. Um, but there isn't typically much that kind of meets an early stage startup with the high quality service and at like a reasonable price. And so that's largely what we're working on doing and what we're delivering. We fill a lot of like head of software, head of mechanical engineering type roles at early stage startups, and use a much more executive headhunting white glove approach and really lean in and partner closely. So might not be answering your question directly because like who the actual other like competitors or other organizations are, and I think that's partly because there are so many of them. Melissa, you have some experience in this domain too from before your time with AdAstra. Do you have any that you want to like highlight? But there's so many recruiting firms out there. There's zero barrier to entry to being a recruiter. So there's a lot of noise in this space.
Yeah, and there's not like a direct competitor like all these other like company names. It just kind of depends on the type of maybe approach that you're looking to get from the agency or recruiting firm you're looking to work with, right? If you want someone that's a little bit more, just this role and then kind of move on. If you're looking to engage with more of kind of a building a relationship, if not this position, then we'll keep in touch for the next one. So the way we kind of work is building more of a relationship and creating this ecosystem within climate tech or space or defense that we're in. So it definitely more narrow, and I can't like look to another company and be like they're doing exactly what we're doing necessarily, but there's a lot of overlaps between kind of the areas that you have just highlighted, Brian.
Any other questions, Michael?
Yeah, we've got one from Sheldon. Can you give us some understanding of how it works to engage with AdAstra and other firms or our job searches? I think you might have answered that.
Yeah, and so it sounded like that's kind of from the candidate side versus the company side. So I'll speak to that on the candidate side. So, um, the realities of how third-party recruiting tends to work is that it's much like the business and operations tend to make the most sense for a third party to partner with a company to find a specific person for a role. Um, there's a couple reasons for that. I think the two big ones are one, frankly, that's like where the money comes from. Like where we get paid is from companies. Companies tend to have more money than individuals, and so like that's just kind of how the money flows. And two, um, there's it can be challenging to find, like we need to know a lot more companies and organizations to find and have a lot more established relationships to find a job for an individual versus if we have a job, we can search information online and search our network to find individuals for the job, and that tends to be a more effective path. And so by default, most third-party headhunting and recruiting firms um, are not partnering like their client is the company, their client isn't the candidate. So I think that's a clear distinction to make. That is kind of the default. Now, you can still leverage organizations like ours really, really effectively to make your searches much more quick and easy and have frankly have more direct access to the hiring teams too. So a good third party, like me and Melissa and the rest of our team, like we have direct access to the hiring manager, often direct access to the founders and the senior leadership team. And so if you're connected with a strong third party organization that is working with the type of companies you want to work at, it is great to network with people like us because if we can talk to you and get to know you and see kind of your strengths, and if we recognize a fit in your profile to one of our clients, we can get you in there much more effectively than like filling out a job application. And
So can
so,
job seekers reach out to you directly? Is that how it goes?
yeah,
Is there a way to do that?
yeah,
Is there a
great
specific?
question. Yeah, exactly. So what like my kind of standard recommendation for people is one, make it easy for quality recruiters and headhunters to find you. And some key ways of doing that are one, yeah, reaching out to us, making us aware of your existence, having us be first degree connections on LinkedIn, so it's easier to get a hold of you, sending us your resume and your contact information so we have it. And also like have a good LinkedIn. Like if you want recruiters to find you, the best way to do that is to essentially have your resume in LinkedIn format. Like make it easy so that people can tell what you're doing, such that they're able to find you and know what you're strong at so that they can reach out to you for the right roles. And then you won't get You also won't get as much noise on LinkedIn either. You won't get as much. There'll still be bad recruiters reaching out for sure, but like hopefully less. Does that answer your question, Sheldon?
Pretty much. It's
Yeah,
okay to reach out to you guys on LinkedIn and try to connect and do that kind of thing, right?
Absolutely. I gave kind of those prefaces and that like we're not necessarily jumping on a call with every single person that reaches
Sure.
out because it wouldn't kind of flow in the standard path. But sometimes a candidate like reaches out just to connect and it's like, oh, actually, I know that Melissa or someone else on our team has a search that you'd be a great fit for, and I make that introduction. Or I know about something that's like not even on job boards, and so it is a really good approach. Just don't necessarily expect to like that they're going to now represent you and do like a ton of that. They might, it's possible, but um, it doesn't always work that way. Is there anything else you'd add to that, Melissa?
And the only other thing to add is, at least for our job board, if you go and see that there's not necessarily a perfect match, we do have general applications. So you could submit
Mm.
your interest into kind of, hey, this is what I'm looking for. This is the types of companies I'm interested in. And then our team will have that so we can make a match when a new position or lead comes our way. And then you'll also be in our system so we can send you our quarterly newsletters and some different content or events that we're attending like this today that you can kind of keep in the loop on what's kind of going on in the industry.
Thank you.
Yeah, we did have one question from Julia in the chat if she wants to unmute and ask her question, or I can ask it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I actually couldn't figure out how to do the raise hand. I don't know my whole Zoom. Sorry about that. So yeah, my
No
question
worries.
is, so I'm primarily looking for fractional project work.
Mm.
I do have, 20 plus years experience in scaling startups, so really helping them grow and build their strategies, go to market, all of that. Do your firm or other firms in the space ever deal with project work or like fractional work? Because I know like I've asked people in the past, and they're like, no, we pretty much only deal with full time. So wanted to ask you guys.
Yeah, great question. And the answer is it depends. So the on our side, we are doing mostly full-time permanent placement, like direct hires. Um, Sometimes it's kind of just turned out that we end up like placing a contractor or some sort of project-based work, but it's not our core function. Um, a lot of firms do have that as a focus, either a primary focus or a secondary focus. So there still can be benefits in that. Um, Most likely, firms that are doing that kind of as a primary will be more effective at that. There are organizations that they're it's a little it can I think their function tends to be a little bit less like true headhunting, a little bit more of like a platform style of like where you kind of have your information on a platform and then they can connect you with other opportunities seeking that are looking for project-based work. So there are organizations out there that do that. I'm less familiar with that because the companies we're talking with tend to be looking to like frankly not have contractors and to replace contractors with their own full-time hires in-house. And also they value and they still recognize the value of contractors and are happy that they are exist, but are often looking to have that like be brought fully in-house.
Makes sense. Thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Julia.
Cool. We've got
And
Ron.
yeah, perfect. And I have a hard stop here more or less at the top of the hour. So I'd
Yeah.
love to at least get this question answered.
Fabulous. So I just building off the concept that words matter. Do you have a recommendation or a site of where we should go on words to use or words not to use when building out like either your resume or like you said, the LinkedIn profile and other elements?
Mm, good question. Hmm. So this might be like really obvious
Or can
advice,
I add
but
can I add one more
yeah,
thing to
please,
that? Is
please.
how many of the hiring agencies or hiring companies are using AI to pre-screen or do any of that? And is there any kind of keywords to kind of use in that to get you
Yeah.
at least get you in the conversation?
Yeah, great question. So I think some key quick hitters are like quantify things as much as possible. Right. This is kind of classic resume writing advice, but like the more you can quantify your outcomes and speak to specific outcomes and quantify them is huge. Um, and then like what words to use or not use. I mean, just try to be careful about what's fluff and what's not fluff, right? Like you want to be concise to the point and not have a ton of just like filler words and like fluff because I think they say the average like recruiter looking at a resume spends like like a single digits seconds looking at your resume. So like if you have a bunch of filler words, they're probably not going to find what they actually want to find and they're going to move on average. And then I would also but do focus on adding the various keywords on things that you have worked on. So like whether it's this type of system or this type of software or this type of hardware or this industry or this company, like anything that is like specific to what your skills are or what you've done, like don't miss those keywords and also maybe even try to write them a couple of different ways. Recruiters tend to do a lot of keyword searching, and maybe they will search for the acronym, but not the full thing. So, like, say the full thing and put the acronym on there, stuff like that, so that like, the keywords can really come out. And yes, AI is becoming more and more common, and there are now like AI sourcing tools, AI outreach, AI, all these things but it's also still doing a lot of the same things. It's indexing off of the information that you have on your profile and on keywords that you've provided. So having that be clear, concise, specific, and covering kind of all the things you are actually skilled at is what I'd recommend. But I thank you so much, everyone. I need to run. I'm not sure if Melissa can stay a little longer. I'm so sorry. I need to jump off. But thank you so much. I hope this was helpful. And
Thank you.
yeah, please get in touch.
Awesome. Yeah, just the closing thought that I have is I always say to my candidates that whatever you put on a resume or LinkedIn is fair game to be asked about in an interview. And I've had candidates put something on their resume that they didn't actually contribute to in a meaningful way. And that ultimately was, they didn't have the answer or DQ'd for that, right? So just, highlight your skills and your strengths, but also be prepared to be asked about those in a conversation and have your contributions outlined to speak to. Awesome. Well, perfect. Well, and hopefully you all have a good rest of your day here.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.